Pacific Ocean, June 1944, well after midnight. By every rule they knew, the battle looked finished. The report was clean. Jord. Certain. On the flagship's bridge, officers logged it without hesitation: enemy ship sunk. The gunfire exchange had gone exactly as planned. Coordinated salvos, overlapping arcs, rapid correction. Flames had been seen. The target had disappeared into smoke and darkness. In night combat, that usually meant one thing: victory. The destroyer group began to reposition almost immediately. Speed was adjusted. Courses shifted to widen spacing and prepare for the next phase, either pursuit of additional contacts or withdrawal before dawn. There was no sense of urgency now. The dangerous part was over. That confidence lasted less than 3 minutes. In the radar room, a junior operator hesitated. The scope showed something it shouldn't have. A return, faint but steady, right where the destroyed ship was supposed to be. At first, it was dismissed as clutter, debris, smoke interference, false echo. But it didn't fade. The contact moved. Slowly at first, then with intention. Course held, speed increasing. The return was not collapsing into noise the way a sinking ship should. It was behaving like something alive. The operator spoke up again. This time, his voice carried doubt. The bridge asked for confirmation. Another sweep came in. The return sharpened, bearings stabilized. The sunk ship was maneuvering and not away. Toward them. Almost simultaneously, the first shells arrived. Not wildfire. Not probing shots. Accurate salvos that landed close enough to throw water across Japanese decks. One round struck near the bow of a destroyer, sending fragments skittering across steel. Another exploded off the port quarter of a second ship. Shock replaced confidence instantly. Lookouts searched the darkness for flashes that still did not appear. Officers demanded range and bearing updates that now contradicted the battle log written moments earlier. The idea that the enemy ship was still functional and firing felt impossible. But radar does not argue. The target had not sunk. It had absorbed damage, survived it, and stayed in the fight. More than that, it had never stopped tracking. While Japanese destroyers celebrated and repositioned, the American ship below the smoke had done something different. It had stayed silent, let radar do the work, and waited for movement that signaled opportunity. Repositioning was that signal. The destroyer group's course changes, routine, disciplined, confident, had traced clear paths across the radar screen. What felt like reset to the Japanese command looked like exposure to the enemy. Now the geometry favored the ship that was supposed to be gone. Fire intensified, salvos tightened. The range closed not because the American ship advanced recklessly, but because it already knew where the destroyers would be. The most dangerous moment in naval combat is often not first contact. It is the moment after you believe the fight is over. The Japanese destroyer group had reported victory because doctrine said the signs were clear: flames, silence, disappearance. What doctrine had not accounted for was radar-guided survival. The target they believed destroyed had never disengaged. It had simply gone quiet. And in the Pacific, in 1944, quiet did not mean dead. It meant waiting. For the moment, the enemy turned away and made themselves visible again. What the Japanese destroyer group did not understand, could not yet understand, was how much the definition of sunk had changed by 1944. In earlier night actions, visual confirmation carried weight. Flames meant loss of control. Smoke meant systems failure. Silence meant withdrawal or death. When a ship vanished into darkness after taking hits, it was reasonable to log it as finished and move on. Radar broke that logic. The American ship had taken damage, but not the kind that ended combat. Fires were contained quickly. Power was rerouted. Most importantly, the radar set never went offline. As long as that screen stayed alive, the ship still existed as a fighting unit, regardless of what could be seen from the outside. While Japanese crews interpreted the disappearance as a sinking, the American crew interpreted it as opportunity. They reduced emissions, they stopped firing, they let the enemy's assumptions do the work. In the plotting room, the picture remained clear: multiple destroyer tracks, course changes spreading them apart, speed adjustments that revealed intent. The enemy was relaxing. That relaxation showed up immediately on radar. When the destroyer group began to reposition, their movements traced smooth, predictable lines. Spacing widened, courses stabilized. The geometry that night combat doctrine relied on, tight coordination, overlapping fire, began to loosen. To radar, that was an invitation. The American gunnery team rebuilt solutions quietly. They did not rush to return fire the moment they could. They waited for confirmation that the destroyers were committed to new headings that would not change suddenly. Only then did they fire. The first salvos were not meant to announce survival. They were meant to reassert control. Shells landed close enough to shock, not scatter. The message was immediate and unmistakable: the target is still here, and it is tracking you. For Japanese command, this was deeply destabilizing. Their timeline had collapsed. The sequence, hit, sink, reset, had been interrupted. They were now fighting an enemy that had effectively skipped the destroyed phase and re-entered the battle from a position of advantage. Orders came fast. Reform, close distance, bring all guns to bear. But those orders assumed parity, two sides seeing each other imperfectly in darkness. That assumption was false. Radar had already sorted priorities. The American ship did not need to guess which destroyer would respond first or which would hesitate. The tracks told that story in advance. The destroyers were no longer hunting. They were being measured. This is the quiet cruelty of radar-era combat. Survival is not binary. A ship does not pass cleanly from alive to dead. There is a middle state, damaged but aware, where the side that keeps sensing can turn loss into leverage. The American ship had lived there for minutes. The Japanese destroyer group had not noticed. By the time they did, the engagement had inverted. The hunters had declared victory and exposed themselves in the process. The target they believed destroyed had never left the battle space. It had simply waited for the moment when confidence replaced caution. And that moment, once it arrived, could not be taken back. Repositioning felt safe because it always had been. Once a target was believed sunk, Japanese destroyer doctrine emphasized spacing and readiness. Ships widened intervals to avoid collisions, adjusted headings to cover likely approach lanes, and prepared to either pursue fresh contacts or disengage before dawn. These movements were disciplined, familiar, and visible in a way no one on board fully appreciated. Radar saw everything. From the American plotting room, the destroyer's confidence drew clean lines across the screen. Each course change clarified intent. Each speed adjustment stabilized prediction. What felt like prudent reset to the Japanese command read as commitment to the American gunnery team. This is where the fight truly turned. The American ship did not chase, it did not surge forward. It held position and let the destroyers complete their maneuvers. Patience mattered more than aggression now. The moment to fire was not when the enemy appeared, but when the enemy stopped expecting resistance. That moment arrived when the destroyers settled. The first corrected salvos landed precisely where the radar said they would, close enough to shatter confidence, accurate enough to force immediate reaction. Water columns rose beside hulls. Shrapnel rang off steel. A near miss crippled a director on one ship. Another blast jammed a mount. The destroyers scattered, but scattering only fed the solution. Independent movement widened the radar picture into multiple solvable problems. The American ship shifted fire deliberately, prioritizing the destroyers that still maneuvered cleanly. Those that slowed were ignored for the moment. Function, dictated attention. Japanese command tried to regain cohesion. Orders to reform were issued into smoke and darkness. Signal lamps blinked without reply. Radios crackled with overlapping reports that arrived out of sequence. The fight that had felt finished minutes earlier now demanded decisions under pressure with less information than before. The cruel truth settled in. The enemy had never disengaged. By declaring victory early, the destroyer group had given up the one advantage knights still offered: uncertainty. Their movements told a story the radar could read. The American ship needed only to listen. The engagement no longer resembled a mutual search in darkness. It resembled correction. And correction, once established, does not require luck, only time. The contrast between experiences could not have been sharper. On Japanese decks, the night felt chaotic. Fires flared unexpectedly. Impacts came without warning. Crews struggled to identify where fire was coming from, let alone how to respond. Every maneuver felt urgent and uncertain. On the American ship, the night felt controlled. Radar operators spoke in steady voices. Gunnery officers adjusted solutions without haste. The captain issued few commands because the picture did not demand them. Darkness simplified the problem by removing visual noise. This asymmetry mattered more than numbers. The American ship was not guessing, it was confirming. Each Japanese reaction updated the solution. Each attempt to regain initiative created a clearer target. The destroyers, acting bravely and correctly by their training, were feeding the very system working against them. Damage accumulated unevenly. One destroyer lost speed after a near-miss ruptured piping. Another took a hit that disabled a gun mount. The formation's balance tilted subtly, then decisively. Coordination frayed as ships entered crisis at different moments. Radar punished this stagger. Fire shifted toward the destroyers still capable of maneuver. The fight filtered itself. Targets that mattered were hit first. Those that didn't were left to burn or drift until later. Japanese commanders sensed the shift but could not reverse it. The enemy remained unseen. Closing distance only tightened solutions. Disengaging exposed predictable tracks. There was no clean option left. What had begun as a logged victory had become an engagement where time favored the side that never lost awareness. The American ship had survived the opening exchange by discipline. It now dominated the follow-on by patience. The destroyer group was learning in real time that survival was not about avoiding hits alone. It was about never leaving the battle space, and never assuming silence meant absence. The most damaging moment was not the first hit. It was the belief that the fight had ended. Once that belief took hold, posture changed. Ships relaxed spacing, courses stabilized, attention shifted from threat assessment to preparation. Those subtle changes, imperceptible on deck, were decisive on radar. When the American ship fired back, it did so into confidence. The destroyers reacted quickly, but reaction could not erase the information already given away. Every evasive move arrived late. Every correction confirmed the track. The battle's tempo flipped. Japanese crews fought with determination, containing fires and returning fire whenever bearings could be guessed. What they lacked was a target that stayed put. The enemy fired accurately without showing itself, then shifted again. By the time command grasped the scale of the error, damage had narrowed options beyond recovery. The destroyer group had not been ambushed. It had been read. Once the destroyer group realized the enemy was still alive, command tried to recover the initiative immediately. Orders came fast. Reform the screen. Close the range. Bring all guns to bear. Each order made sense on paper. Each assumed a battle that still followed visual logic: enemy sighted, maneuver observed, response executed. But this fight no longer lived in that world. By the time orders were transmitted, the situation they addressed had already shifted. One destroyer received instructions to turn just after it had already altered course to avoid incoming fire. Another was told to accelerate moments after damage reduced its speed. Signals crossed in darkness and smoke, arriving late or incomplete. This was not confusion born of panic. It was compression. Radar-driven combat collapsed the time between detection and consequence. Command still functioned, but it functioned too slowly to shape outcomes. The destroyers were reacting to impacts while the unseen enemy was acting on prediction. That gap widened with every minute. Captains stopped waiting for confirmation and began acting on instinct. They maneuvered locally, trying to survive immediate threats rather than execute a shared plan. This fractured the group further, turning coordinated defense into individual reactions. Ironically, this independence made things worse. Each destroyer's movement appeared clearly on radar. Independent courses created cleaner tracks than formation maneuver ever had. What felt like decentralization to the Japanese command looked like clarity to the American fire control team. Orders continued to arrive. They simply could not land. The destroyer group was no longer fighting a synchronized battle. It was fighting a series of overlapping emergencies, each demanding attention now, not after coordination. Command had not failed in judgment, it had been overtaken by tempo. The engagement no longer belonged to whoever issued the best orders. It belonged to whoever needed the fewest. As the fight continued, a pattern emerged that no one ordered, but everyone felt. Ships that still maneuvered drew fire. Ships that slowed were ignored, temporarily. The American ship did not distribute fire evenly. It selected targets based on function. Radar made that possible. A destroyer that still moved cleanly, still turned decisively, still posed a threat. That ship mattered. And it was punished. This created a brutal filtering effect. Destroyers that tried hardest to re-engage suffered the most. Those crippled early drifted in fire and darkness, spared only because they no longer shaped the fight. Survival, briefly, belonged to irrelevance. Japanese crews noticed this instinctively. Some captains hesitated before maneuvering again. Others pressed forward anyway, believing aggression was the only answer. Both choices carried risk: hold course and remain predictable, move and draw fire. There was no safe option left. Damage accumulated unevenly. One destroyer lost a mount. Another took flooding that reduced speed. A third suffered near misses that shook crews and jammed equipment. Each incident narrowed choices further. Coordination collapsed not from fear, but from divergence. Every ship now lived inside its own crisis. The group still existed, but it no longer acted as a unit. Radar punished that separation ruthlessly, isolating viable targets and removing them from the equation one by one. This is how the battle shortened. Not through a decisive blow, but through erosion. Capability drained faster than resolve. The destroyer group was not defeated in spirit, it was defeated in function. By the time commanders understood that the engagement was filtering itself beyond recovery, the remaining ships no longer had the power to reverse the process. The fight had become mechanical. And mechanics do not negotiate. Morning arrived quietly. The sea looked calm, almost indifferent. Smoke thinned. Fires burned lower. The outlines of damaged destroyers became visible against grey water. Debris floated where the night had erased detail. There was no renewed exchange. No sudden reversal. The battle had already ended. Daylight did not bring clarity to command, it brought confirmation. What radar had known hours earlier was now visible to the eye. Ships were scattered, some barely moved, others drifted, damage too extensive for immediate repair. The enemy was absent. Not retreating. Not hiding. Simply gone because it no longer needed to be present. For Japanese crews, This absence was unsettling. Naval tradition taught that dawn mattered, that daylight restored control and offered opportunity to regroup or counterattack. Here, daylight offered nothing except inventory. The engagement had not paused overnight. It had concluded. The most disturbing realization was how little time the actual fighting had taken. The decisive phase had occurred minutes after victory was reported, long before dawn, long before reassessment felt necessary. The rest had been consequence. Daylight merely exposed what confidence had hidden. In earlier naval warfare, silence meant absence. A ship that stopped firing, stopped signaling, stopped showing itself, was assumed to be finished or disengaging. That assumption shaped doctrine, reports, and decisions. Radar erased it. Silence now meant choice. The American ship had gone quiet not because it was defeated, but because it no longer needed to announce itself. Radar allowed it to sense without being seen, to wait without losing awareness. That was the decisive shift. The Japanese destroyer group learned, too late, that disappearance no longer equaled destruction. A ship could burn, go dark, and still fight with full awareness. As long as sensing continued, the engagement was alive. This inverted the danger curve. The moment that felt safest, after logging a kill, became the most dangerous. Confidence reshaped posture, posture reshaped movement, movement fed the enemy information. Silence became a weapon, and the side that misunderstood it paid the price. The Japanese destroyer group did everything doctrine required. They coordinated fire. They assessed damage. They reported victory and repositioned responsibly. None of that was careless. What doomed them was certainty. They believed the signs meant what they always had. Flames, silence, disappearance. These had ended fights for generations. In 1944, those signs no longer told the full story. The target, they believed destroyed, had never left the battle space. It stayed aware. It stayed patient. And it waited for confidence to expose opportunity. When it fired back, it did so with information the destroyers had already given away. The battle did not turn on a miracle shot or a sudden charge. It turned on an assumption. In radar warfare, the most dangerous words are not enemy approaching. They are target destroyed. Because once you believe the fight is over, you stop protecting yourself from the enemy, who never stopped watching.